Oscar Shaw is a 2026 American action thriller film directed by Ellis, Frazier, and Justin Nesbitt and written by Don Roff. The film stars Michael Jai White in the title role, with Tyrese, Gibson, and Isaiah Washington in supporting roles. Michael Jai White plays Oscar Shaw, a retired police detective who is trying to rebuild his life after losing his closest friend. The film was released in the United States on January 9th, 2026 by Samuel Goldwyn Films. The basic idea is simple. A former detective who has already walked away from police work is pulled back into the dangerous world he thought he had left behind when new information appears about his friend's murder. From there, the story becomes a personal fight between revenge and justice, and that is what gives the film its emotional center. The first thing that works in Oscar Shaw is the character at the heart of the story. Oscar is not introduced as a young hero who has nothing to lose. He is a retired police detective. He has already lived through years of difficult situations, and now he is trying to stay away from the streets. That makes his return to the criminal world more meaningful. He is not looking for excitement. He is not trying to prove that he is still the toughest man in the room. He is carrying guilt. He believes that he failed his closest friend when he was still a police officer, and that feeling has stayed with him even after retirement. Michael Jai White is well suited to this kind of role because he can make a character look physically strong without making him appear completely fearless. Oscar may know how to handle dangerous people, but that does not mean he is emotionally comfortable with what he is doing. There is a difference between being capable of violence and wanting to live with violence. The film tries to build its main character around that difference. Oscar's biggest problem is not simply that his friend was murdered, it is that Oscar feels responsible for not protecting him. That guilt becomes the fuel behind his investigation. When new information about the killing comes to light, Oscar cannot simply ignore it. He knows that going back into the investigation may destroy the quiet life he has been trying to build, but staying away means accepting that his friend's death may never receive justice. That is where the film starts becoming interesting. Oscar is caught between two different versions of himself. One is the retired man who wants peace. The other is the detective who spent years dealing with criminals and trying to protect his neighborhood. The second personality has never really disappeared. It has only been pushed into the background. When Oscar starts asking questions again, he begins entering a world he understands very well. He knows how criminals think. He knows that people lie when they are afraid. He knows that witnesses often hide important information. He also knows that people involved in organized crime rarely give away the truth easily. But there is one major difference this time. Oscar is no longer working within the police department. He has no badge, he has no official authority. He cannot simply arrest someone because he believes that person is involved. That creates one of the film's main conflicts. Oscar wants justice, but the methods he begins using become more personal and more dangerous. The more he investigates, the more difficult it becomes for him to separate justice from revenge. That is a familiar idea in action thrillers, but it can still work when the character is strong enough. In Oscar's case, the idea has some emotional weight because the investigation is connected directly to his past. He's not solving a random case. He's trying to deal with something that has been hurting him for a long time. This also gives the film a darker emotional tone than a simple revenge movie. A normal revenge story can be very direct. Someone is killed, the hero becomes angry, and then the hero goes after the people responsible. Oscar Shaw tries to spend more time inside the hero's mind. Oscar has already been living with the consequences of his friend's death. The investigation only brings those feelings back to the surface. That makes his journey less about becoming a hero and more about deciding what kind of man he wants to be. The title itself is important because the film keeps the focus on Oscar rather than building a huge world around him. The story is personal. The neighborhood matters, the criminal underworld matters, the police background matters, but everything comes back to Oscar's emotional struggle. The supporting cast also helps give the story a wider feeling. Tyrese Gibson and Isaiah Washington bring additional weight to the film, even though Oscar remains the center of attention. Their presence helps make the world around Oscar feel larger than one man's personal problem. In a story like this, supporting characters are important because they can show different ways of looking at justice, loyalty, crime, and revenge. The strongest part of the story is the way Oscar's personal pain becomes connected to the problems of the neighborhood. At first, his motivation is very personal. He wants answers about his friend's murder. But as he continues investigating, he finds himself moving deeper into the criminal network that has affected the community around him. That creates a second layer in the story. Oscar is not only trying to solve his friend's murder anymore, he is also trying to understand how much damage the criminal world has caused around him. This is where his old police identity begins to return. Even though he is retired, he still feels responsible for people. He may tell himself that he wants revenge, but there is clearly another part of him that wants to restore some kind of order. That difference is important. Revenge says they hurt me, so I will hurt them. Justice says they have hurt people and someone has to stop them. Oscar moves between those two ideas throughout the story. The film becomes more effective when it does not give him an easy answer. If Oscar simply became a violent hero who destroyed every criminal he met, the emotional side of the story would become much weaker. The interesting question is whether Oscar can find redemption without becoming the same kind of person he is fighting. That is the real battle. The physical fights and action scenes are part of the entertainment, but the more important action is happening inside Oscar. Every time he chooses to use force, he moves closer to the person he is trying to punish and farther away from the peaceful life he wanted. That creates tension, even when there is no fight happening. Oscar's retirement was supposed to be a fresh beginning. He wanted to stay away from the streets. He wanted to live quietly. But the past does not allow him to do that. The murder of his friend is like an unfinished chapter. He tried to close it. He failed. Now the new information forces him to open it again. This is a familiar storytelling technique, but it works because the emotional reason is clear. The audience understands why Oscar cannot walk away. One of the merits of Oscar Shaw is therefore its straightforward central motivation. The story does not need complicated explanations to make Oscar's decision believable. His closest friend was murdered, he believes he failed him, and new information gives him a chance to find the truth. That is enough to move the story forward. Another positive point is the choice of Michael Jai White. He brings experience to a character who needs both physical authority and emotional restraint. Oscar does not need to be constantly shouting or showing anger. Sometimes the character can communicate more simply through his face and body language. That is especially useful in a revenge story. A character who is angry in every scene can quickly become tiring. Oscar is more interesting when his anger is controlled. He is a man who has already seen too much. He knows what violence can do. That knowledge makes his decisions more serious. The film also benefits from its relatively grounded setup. Oscar is not presented as an impossible superhero who can defeat an entire criminal organization without difficulty. The basic idea is that he's an experienced former detective who knows the streets. His skills come from his past rather than from some unbelievable superpower. That makes the action easier to accept. The criminal underworld is another important part of the film. Oscar's investigation takes him back into a world where trust is limited and danger can come from unexpected places. People have their own interests. Some want money, some want power, some want revenge, others simply want to survive. Oscar has to move through this environment carefully. The problem is that he is also emotionally involved. That makes him vulnerable. A professional detective working on a case can sometimes step back and look at evidence logically. Oscar cannot completely do that because the victim was someone he loved. Every new piece of information affects him personally. That is one reason the film's theme of revenge versus redemption has value. Oscar believes that finding the people responsible will give him peace, but the story asks whether revenge can really provide peace. That is a question many crime thrillers have explored, but it remains relevant because people often confuse revenge with closure. Punishing someone does not automatically remove grief. It does not erase guilt. It does not bring a dead person back. Oscar has to learn that for himself. The film's neighborhood setting also gives the story a social side. Oscar's connection to the streets is not only professional, he has history there. He has seen the people who live there struggle with crime. When he returns, he is not entering a completely unfamiliar place. He is coming back to a place that remembers him. That gives his return some emotional weight. At the same time, the film is clearly designed as an action thriller, so viewers should not expect a slow character drama from beginning to end. There is violence, confrontation, and danger. Oscar's investigation naturally leads him into situations where physical action becomes unavoidable. This is where the film's balance becomes important. The emotional material gives the story meaning. The action gives it energy. If the action becomes too dominant, the character development can feel secondary. If the emotional scenes become too long, the thriller can lose momentum. The film tries to keep both sides moving together. One of the possible weaknesses is that the basic revenge and redemption storyline is not completely new. Viewers who have watched many crime thrillers may recognize several familiar elements. The retired cop pulled back into danger is a well-used idea. The murdered friend is another familiar motivation. The criminal underworld, hidden information, and personal investigation are also standard thriller material. So the film's success depends heavily on execution. The concept itself is not enough. The performances, pacing, and atmosphere have to make the familiar story feel fresh. Michael Jai White helps in that area because his screen presence gives Oscar credibility. He looks like someone who could realistically have spent years as a police detective and still be dangerous after retirement, but physical presence alone cannot carry the whole film. The emotional side of Oscar's character is what gives the story its deeper purpose. The guilt over his friend's death is particularly important. Guilt is different from anger. Anger points outward. Guilt points inward. Oscar can blame the criminals, but he also blames himself. That makes his journey more complicated. He is not simply asking, "Who killed my friend?" He is also asking, "Could I have stopped it?" That second question is much harder. It is the question that keeps him from enjoying the quiet life he tried to build. When the investigation begins, Oscar slowly returns to his old habits. He observes people, he asks questions, he follows leads, he studies the criminal environment, he becomes the detective again. But there is a danger in becoming the old Oscar. The old Oscar worked within the law. The new Oscar is outside it. That creates a moral line that he can cross very easily. Once he starts taking the law into his own hands, the audience has to wonder whether he is still fighting for justice or simply looking for an excuse to punish the people he hates. That is one of the strongest themes in the movie. Oscar's greatest enemy may not be the criminals. It may be his own anger. A good action thriller does not always need a completely new story. Sometimes it can take a familiar story and make the character's emotional problems strong enough to keep us interested. Oscar Shaw has that opportunity. The film also has a straightforward storytelling style. The basic plot is easy to understand. Oscar is a retired detective. His friend was murdered. New information appears. Oscar investigates. His investigation takes him into the criminal world. When he becomes increasingly willing to break the rules, he has to decide how far he is prepared to go. There is no need for complicated explanation. That simplicity can be a strength. It allows the audience to concentrate on Oscar. However, simplicity can also become a weakness if the supporting characters are not developed enough. A crime thriller needs believable people around the main character. The criminals should feel like real threats. The people Oscar meets should have reasons for helping or betraying him. If those characters are only there to move the story from one action scene to another, the film can feel predictable. This is where the supporting performances become important. Tyrese, Gibson, and Isaiah Washington add recognizable faces and experience to the cast. Their roles help expand the world of the story and give Oscar people to interact with outside his personal investigation. The success of these characters depends on how much emotional and dramatic space the screenplay gives them. A revenge story can sometimes become too focused on the hero. Everything happens because the hero wants something. Everyone else becomes an obstacle. That approach can work in a pure action movie, but it limits the emotional depth. The more convincing the supporting characters are, the more convincing Oscar's journey becomes. Another merit is that the movie is built around an older protagonist rather than a young character who is still discovering himself. Oscar already knows the world. He already has experience. He has already made mistakes. His challenge is not learning how to become a detective. His challenge is learning how to live with what happened. That gives the story a different feeling. Oscar's retirement also represents something larger. Sometimes people leave a difficult career physically, but emotionally they cannot leave it behind. Police officers, soldiers, firefighters, and others who spend years dealing with danger can carry their experiences long after they stop doing the job. Oscar represents that idea in a fictional crime story. He left the force, but the force did not completely leave him. His instincts remain, his memories remain, his guilt remains, and when his friend's murder comes back into his life, everything returns. That is a strong foundation for the character. The redemption part of the story is also important. Oscar is not simply trying to punish criminals. He wants to feel that his life still has meaning. He wants to believe that he can correct something that went wrong. But redemption cannot come simply from defeating bad people. It has to come from Oscar changing himself. That is what makes the title character worth following. If he only wanted revenge, his journey would be much simpler. Because he wants redemption too, every decision has greater weight. The movie's action side naturally creates opportunities for Oscar to use his old skills. His experience as a detective makes him capable of handling dangerous situations. The audience can believe that he knows how to read a criminal environment. Still, the film must be careful not to make him too powerful. If Oscar can defeat every opponent easily, tension disappears. A retired detective should have limits. He should become tired. He should make mistakes. He should sometimes be surprised. Those weaknesses make an action hero more believable. The idea of an older hero returning to the streets also creates a sense of history. Oscar is not just fighting today's criminals. He is fighting memories of the world he once knew. The neighborhood may have changed, the criminals may have changed, even Oscar himself has changed. That gives the story a quiet sadness beneath the action. He wants to move forward, but the past keeps pulling him back. The murder of his closest friend becomes the bridge between those two parts of his life. From a review point of view, the biggest merit of Oscar Shaw is therefore not its basic plot. The basic plot is familiar. The strength comes from the emotional reason behind the investigation and from Michael Jai White's ability to give the character physical strength and seriousness at the same time. The biggest demerit is also connected to the same point. Because the story uses familiar action thriller ideas, the film needs especially strong character writing and fresh situations to avoid feeling like something audiences have already seen. If the criminal plot becomes predictable, the emotional journey has to carry the movie. If the emotional journey is not developed enough, then the action may feel like a collection of familiar scenes. That is the main challenge. Another possible weakness is the danger of making the revenge theme too simple. The film wants Oscar to question his choices, but action movies sometimes move quickly from moral questions to physical solutions. When the hero is angry, the story can easily treat violence as the easiest answer. A stronger version of this story would allow Oscar to face the consequences of every decision. If he breaks the law, someone should be affected. If he threatens someone, there should be a cost. If he becomes violent, he should have to live with that choice. That would make the redemption theme more powerful. The audience should feel that Oscar is fighting not only criminals, but also the darker side of himself. That is what makes a revenge story memorable. Without that struggle, it is simply another man hunting criminals. With that struggle, it becomes a story about a person trying to decide whether pain will control the rest of his life. The film's straightforward style is also suitable for viewers who prefer action stories without unnecessary complications. The plot gives the audience a clear direction from the beginning. The emotional motivation is easy to understand, and the criminal investigation provides enough tension to keep the story moving. The movie does not need a complicated mystery to work. The real mystery is how far Oscar will go. That question becomes more important than simply discovering who is responsible. Because the audience already understands Oscar's pain, every step deeper into the criminal world feels dangerous in a different way. He could lose himself, he could become the thing he is fighting, he could destroy the chance of having a peaceful life again. That is why the redemption theme matters. Oscar's final goal should not simply be revenge, it should be peace. And peace is much harder to achieve. A person can punish another person. A person cannot punish their own memories. That is where Oscar's emotional journey becomes meaningful. The film also has the advantage of having a title character who is easy to identify with. He is not perfect. He has failed someone. He has regrets. He has anger. He wants to move on but cannot. Those are human feelings. Even viewers who have never worked in law enforcement can understand the basic emotion of carrying guilt after losing someone. The criminal setting simply gives those emotions a more dramatic form. There is also something interesting about the idea of a retired detective trying to keep a low profile. Retirement normally suggests peace, routine, and distance from danger. The film turns that idea around. Oscar's quiet life is not truly peaceful because his mind is still connected to the past. The new information about the murder acts like a door opening again. Once he walks through that door, he cannot easily return. That is a good way to build a thriller. The story begins with personal grief and expands into a larger conflict. Oscar's investigation brings him into contact with the criminal world. The criminal world brings him back into the streets. The streets bring back the detective he used to be. And the detective identity brings back the question of what he really wants. Does he want revenge? Does he want justice? Does he want forgiveness? Or does he simply want to stop feeling guilty? The film's answer to these questions is what ultimately determines its emotional success. The merits are clear. Michael J. White is a natural fit for the central role. The character has a strong emotional motivation. The retired detective angle gives the familiar revenge story some personality. The conflict between revenge and justice creates a useful moral layer. The neighborhood setting gives the story a social dimension. The supporting cast adds experience and helps build the world around Oscar. The straightforward storytelling makes the movie easy to follow. The demerits are also worth mentioning. The basic plot is familiar. The retired cop revenge formula has been used many times. Some viewers may predict certain developments before they happen. The supporting characters need enough depth to avoid becoming simple plot devices. The action must remain believable rather than turning Oscar into an unbeatable superhero. Most importantly, the redemption theme needs enough attention so that the movie does not become only a revenge story with a few emotional scenes added to it. For viewers who enjoy Michael J. White, crime thrillers, and stories about former law enforcement characters returning to dangerous situations, Oscar Shaw has a clear appeal. It offers the kind of central character that suits White's screen presence. It also gives him a role where physical ability and emotional pain can exist together. For viewers who want a completely new action concept, the movie may feel less surprising. The ingredients are familiar. What matters is how those ingredients are put together, and that is the fair way to look at Oscar Shaw. It is not the idea of revenge itself that makes the movie interesting. It is the man standing in the middle of that revenge story. Oscar Shaw is a man who has already lost someone important. He has already lost part of himself through guilt. He has already walked away from his old life. Then the past comes back. He could ignore it. He could stay quiet. He could tell himself that retirement means the case is no longer his problem. But he cannot do that. He returns because something inside him still believes that his friend deserves justice. That decision becomes both his strength and his weakness. It gives him purpose. It also puts him in danger. The deeper he goes, the harder it becomes to know whether he is helping himself or destroying himself. That is the central emotional question of the film. And even though the movie works inside a familiar action thriller framework, that question can give it a reason to exist. In the end, Oscar Shaw can be seen as a story about a man who thinks he is searching for the people responsible for his friend's death, but slowly discovers that he is also searching for a way to live with himself. The criminal investigation gives him the external goal. His guilt gives him the internal goal. The action gives the story its energy. while the conflict between revenge and redemption gives it its meaning. The best thing about Oscar is that he does not begin the story as a perfect hero. He begins as a damaged man trying to stay away from the life that once defined him. That makes his return more interesting. He is not going back because he loves the job. He is going back because he cannot forget what happened. That is a simple idea, but it can be powerful when handled honestly. The movie's real success then depends on whether the audience believes Oscar's emotional journey. If we believe his guilt, his anger makes sense. If we believe his love for his friend, his investigation makes sense. If we believe his desire for redemption, the final part of his journey has meaning. And if all those pieces work together, Oscar Shaw becomes more than a standard action thriller. It becomes the story of a man trying to turn his worst memory into one final chance to do something right. That is why the film can connect with viewers who enjoy action movies, but also want something personal behind the fighting. Oscar is not fighting simply because he is capable of fighting. He is fighting because he believes he failed someone. And the real question is whether defeating the people responsible will finally allow him to forgive himself. That is where the movie's heart is.